First, we have Kelkiyana Yazzie, and she is a fourth-generation Dine NPS Park Ranger who grew up in Shonto, Arizona on the Navajo Nation. And she previously worked at Navajo National Monument, where her great-grandfather was one of the first Dine Park Rangers in the 1950s. Kelkiyana recently completed her master's degree at NAU in Parks and Recreation Management, where her research focused on Indigenous representation in national parks, something we're very happy to have happen these days. She is committed to elevating first voices at Grand Canyon, including sharing Indigenous perspectives on the canyon's history, geology, and ecology. She enjoys traveling and visiting home on the res to spend time with her family and her dog, Anakin. Let's please give a warm Ya'ate Abine to Kelkiyana.
Thank you so much. Yata Bene, good morning. My name is Kelkiyana Yazzie. Dine I am from Shonto, Arizona, about 2 hours from here. And has anyone been to Navajo National Monument? Yay! Oh my gosh, this is awesome. This is like the most people who know about it. But yeah, I previously worked there for about 5 years, and now I'm here at Grand Canyon National Park. I previously worked as an interpretive park ranger here in the South Rim in the Village District. But I just recently accepted the position as tribal program coordinator for the park here. So I'm really excited to be in this role. Yeah. And be directly working with our 11 associated tribal communities. This is the program I usually give as a park ranger, so I'm gonna do my best to minimize a 30-minute presentation into 20 minutes. But why this is important is because, as most of, if not all of you may know, that the dominant narrative that's existed here at Grand Canyon focuses on the Euro-American pioneers and explorers, just like these signs here show. The sign on the left used to be near the Bright Angel Trailhead until it was removed earlier this year, back in May. That was highlighting Ralph Cameron and how he was making financial revenue off of the Bright Angel Trail. And in the same sign, Native people were labeled as prehistoric. And we're like, what? We're not prehistoric, we exist today. So it's very fortunate that the park's taking this new initiative to kind of steer away from these dominant narratives that have existed here for the past 100 years and being more inclusive to our voices as tribal people. And of course, the sign on the right is out at Powell Point along Hermit Road, and on the sign, it calls John Wesley Powell the first explorer of Grand Canyon. And that again erases that presence and that knowledge that has existed here for generations way before the 1800s. But as mentioned in my introduction, I am a fourth-generation park ranger. This photo is of my great-grandfather, Hubert Lafter. He's on the right. And that's his brother, Floyd Lafter. They were both Navajo medicine men, and Hubert worked as a park ranger at Navajo National Monument. And it really means a lot to me to carry on this sense of stewardship and tradition, because we do have common values with what the National Park Service stands for. And that's our value of stewardship and our connection to the landscape and wanting to help protect it and preserve it. But this quote from a tribal member here says that it's important to show what the difference is between what stewardship is and what ownership is. With stewardship, it means we have this relationship, this reciprocal relationship with the landscape, where ownership implies that we have a dominance over it. So it's really important to keep in mind and what stewardship means. And I also included another quote from our current National Park Service Director, Chuck Sams, who is an Indigenous tribal member himself. And he just explains that wilderness is just a brand new concept. It's not even a concept to a lot of Indigenous people, because we've been here for a very long time, and we've always had this relationship with the landscape. And he goes on in this quote to explain that we don't even have a word for wild. The closest I can think of is crooked. So at the end here, it just shows that, again, emphasizing the reciprocal relationship we have with the landscape. And the more we integrate Indigenous knowledge here in the park, the more we have that stronger sense of stewardship. So we recently consulted with the 11 associated tribes to create this map. As tribal members, we don't, actually are not a big fan of maps, because back then, before we were put on reservations, we were migrating. We were interacting with groups of different people. We were moving with the seasons and all of that and trading. But yeah, so this is the map we could come up with that shows the traditional territories of our tribal nations in correlation to here at Grand Canyon. And based on science in the Western perspectives, it says that people have been here, I think the new number is 24,000 years ago. And a part of that, to help support that, is our physical objects found here in the canyon. So these are photos from our park's museum collections. On the left is a split twig figurine. If you don't know, haven't seen one before, it's usually about the size of our hands. That's how big they are. And the park museum collections have hundreds of these. And then there's many more still in the river corridor down by the Colorado River. They're commonly made by willow that's found down by the river. And these have a lot of common theories on what they may have been used for. The biggest theory is potentially maybe a hunting ritual. And another theory is like for kids, that was just like a toy. But with the hunting rituals, it's interesting because people back then were living day to day. They were surviving day to day. So a huge thing they relied on was meat. And so that was part of a hunting ritual to make sure they have a successful hunt. And then this one here on the right is a pottery, and pottery is actually still made today. This is a practice passed down from generation to generation. A lot of the way we carry on our information is through crafts like this, like those etchings you see on the pot. That all has significant meaning to different tribes, and it has a story with it, whether that story is told like sitting around a fire from an elder to children, or if it's told through prayers and songs. A lot of these symbols, with the wavy kind, what I learned from my time working at Navajo National Monument, is that they represent water, and it tells us a story of what that pot would have been used for. So maybe this was used for water, for a ceremony or medicinal purpose. But yeah, pottery making is still done today by many Indigenous people. And then these may look familiar to some of you, especially the one on the left. These are some pictographs located on the Bright Angel Trail, just above Upper Tunnel. And the one on the right is some petroglyphs here. And the difference is that a pictograph is usually painted onto the rock wall with like minerals or plant pigment. And then the petroglyph is etched into the rock wall. And a lot of these pictographs and petroglyphs, they tell us stories of like migrations, of clans. I introduced myself in Navajo at the beginning of this presentation, and what I said were my clans. And clans are a huge part of our identity and who we are as Navajo people. And it's a way for us to connect to our ancestors in the past, because back then, clans were formed. Maybe you're really good basket makers, really good rug weavers, really good hunters, and today that's been passed down from generation to generation. In Navajo, our first clans are passed down through our mothers. So if I ever have any kids, they'll have my first clan, Pitani, which is folded arm people, which I hope is a good thing. So that's the importance of clans. Unfortunately, a lot of people my age and younger, we don't speak Navajo fluently, but something we will know is how to introduce ourselves in Dine with our clans. That just shows how important and integral it is to us. And it makes me think when I look at these, how important it is to like the Hopi, the Zuni, who still have these living connections to these spaces here. And I think I have time. I'm gonna go ahead and play this short 1-minute clip of Jim Enote. Most of you might know who he is, but he's from Zuni, and he's gonna talk about the petroglyphs and pictographs they find out at Zuni.
I'm Jim Enote, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Colorado Plateau Foundation. And we are here in Zuni Pueblo lands in what is now New Mexico. The Grand Canyon we call Chimikyanicatea, our place of emergence. It is the place that all the tribes have in common, is that they respect that place. So these petroglyphs that we see here, we see many of the same ones in the Grand Canyon. Some of them are clan symbols, some of them are different symbols pertaining to movement and migration, but they are the same ones that we see in the Grand Canyon. These petroglyphs, they're telling us that we should never forget where we came from. And when we go to the Grand Canyon and we see the same markings there, it's always this my goodness moment. It's true.
Yeah, so that emphasizes that our history and our past, it's just still very much present in our cultures. And that goes to ancestral sites, such as the many that are found here in the canyon. We're really trying to get away from terminology like ruins or calling them abandoned. I know that's what traditional archaeology, like Mesa Verde National Park, would assume about the people, like, oh, it's a mystery and where they went. But in reality, we're still here and we still have these connections to these spaces, just like these quotes from Hopi and Zuni say. Even though they're not physically occupied, there's still this ancestral presence there. And it's important to acknowledge that. I got to join the Navajo Nation river trip this past May, and we had some medicine men on our boat, and they would do prayers and offerings at sites like this. Again, recognizing and never forgetting where we come from, honoring those who came before us. Before the Grand Canyon was called the Grand Canyon, before Grand Canyon National Park was called the park, these are a couple names and examples of what Native people have for the canyon. And I want to include this quote from Tim Begay, who we work with closely in the Intertribal Working Group, which I'll mention a little later. But he explains how in Navajo, what this means. There's so many different words for the canyon in Navajo, but these are some common ones. And I noticed in the Navajo language, when you translate it from English, a lot of it can't anyway, but when you do, it's always descriptive. So he explains how Bitsisnaneze means coming to the edge. So where you can see upriver and downriver. So those are some examples of indigenous names for the canyon. So in my time being here at Grand Canyon National Park, I worked a lot directly with tribal members, and I always hear them commonly refer to the canyon as a living landscape. And what that means is that every little thing you see out there, the trees, the rocks, even the air, the night sky, all has this living entity, this spiritual entity that's deserving of respect, just like this Wallapai tribal member says. And I mentioned oral history a little bit earlier, and that's huge to a lot of indigenous cultures because a lot of our cultures didn't have a written language until very recently. And to provide a personal example, my dad, my grandma, my great-grandma, and the generations above them all speak Navajo fluently, but something they can't do is read or write Navajo. So that just shows how new of a concept writing is to us. And so that brings us back to oral history, and that's usually passed down in our traditional language, and it's important that we carry on our language so we don't lose all of these stories about the plants, the animals, and the canyon itself. Just like this Navajo woman says, like, every little thing you see out there has so many stories about them, it'll take many years to tell them. And then with the Wallapai, their history is told in many different ways. Again, as through stories, through songwriting, prayers. So those are different ways. And a lot of their stories tie back to the Colorado River, which brings us to the importance of water here in the canyon. A lot of people come visit Grand Canyon when they hike down. They go to places like Ribbon Falls, to Deer Creek, when they join river trips, or they get a backpacking permit to have a supai. And we're like, yeah, they look really pretty, they're really nice, it's cool to recreate here. But I hope that most people know when they come to these spaces that they're very culturally significant to us. And I'm actually gonna skip the next video in interest of time. But there's a very common saying in Navajo, "Tuo e'ena," which means water is life, because without water, there's no life. The same can be said about how the Grand Canyon was formed. The common geological theory is that it was carved out by the Colorado River over 6 million years ago. And yeah, that just without it, we wouldn't have things that we have today, or we wouldn't even exist today. And I gave this presentation recently where my colleague Vincent Diaz, who's Wallapai, was at, and he's just like, hey, in Wallapai we have a similar phrase, and that's, water is a relative. So we had Georgine translate this for us. She's a language preservationist for the Wallapai tribe, explaining what that means, and it's just kind of saying that this resource, this water, is a living being and it's a relative, and we honor it through prayers and offerings. Here's a couple more quotes from Wallapai. I don't know if many people have been out to Grand Canyon West, but they have an awesome interpretive experience there at the Skywalk. And so some of these quotes are from there, just again explaining that significance of what the Colorado River means to the Wallapai people. They commonly refer to it, the middle of the river as the backbone of their people, and they have creation stories relating to how they were created from it. And I mentioned Ribbon Falls, that has a significant meaning for the Zuni people. It's considered their birthplace, their place of emergence, where they came from the world before to this current world here. And I wanted to include these quotes from Ronnie, another intertribal working group member, explaining that this place is a place of prayer, not just for the Zuni, but also the other tribes in the canyon. Again, kind of highlighting those relationships that we've had with other tribes in this region for generations. Another area is the confluence, where the larger Colorado River and the little Colorado River meet up. And near this area is the Hopi's place of emergence, called the Sipapuni. And I like to give voices to tribal members themselves, so I included another clip from Lee from Hopi, and he's gonna explain what that space means. It's another 1-minute clip.
The Grand Canyon has a spirit. They say that we emerge from the Grand Canyon, the place called Sipapuni, which is the trail to the underworld. And then from there we emerge into this present world. And eventually we will travel into the spiritual world. And when that happens, our spirit travels to the Grand Canyon, particularly around the area of the confluence. And that is a home for our ancestral people and their spirits. And from the Grand Canyon, the spirits travel throughout the world as clouds. So every day they are with us. So I hope that the visitors will share that kind of feeling, that the Grand Canyon and humanity are all one.
Yeah, and just to provide some Paiute perspectives is, again, in their oral histories and their stories, they say, we've been here forever. We don't have any stories that say we've been anywhere else. And another place of significance for them is Deer Creek, which is a very popular destination if you join a Colorado River rafting trip. Before this became a park, Paiute people came to this area for ceremonial purposes, for farming, for gathering, for camping. And then later on, when European settlers were coming to the area, it was a place of refuge for them. Skip that. Another resource important to us is the night sky. I'm sure we all know that Grand Canyon is an international dark sky park, meaning that we have some of the darkest night sky